Welcome to Lee Domingue's podcast, where he shares stories and teaches principles behind why and how your legacy starts today.
Well, hey everyone, and welcome to Legacy Starts Today podcast. My name's Lee Domingue, and we're so passionate about living a life on purpose and starting your legacy today. Well, this month's episode is with a great friend of mine, Pastor Aaron Burke from Tampa, Florida, and he's pastor of Radiant Church, one of the fastest growing churches actually in America today. And I've got a front row seat for many years as we were discussing before we joined everyone, just the view of watching God's hand on Pastor Aaron's life and his entire family. But his church is doing some just phenomenal things. And so we're going to tap into some of his journey, both from a perspective not only as a pastor and leader and really a kingdom builder, but someone who is started their legacy today and somebody who's living that out now, as well as tap into some of his family and ministry. And then we're going to touch on what I'm so excited about, which is his new book. His first book that's come out and just published called The Unfair Advantage. And I know it's going to be a great resource. So my brother, I'm just so excited. I want to welcome you to Legacy Starts Today podcast.
Thank you so much, Lee. You have been a massive voice in my life and love the call of God on your life and how it's helping me and so many of my business leaders and so many just kingdom builders in our church. So you're a big part of what God's doing in Tampa Bay. And we got those Baton Rouge roots, both of us. So that I still like that's my stomping ground. So I love that we have that in common too.
Yeah, so good. Now a little bit of background. You graduated from Southeastern in like 2005 and then later got your master's in 2010. Actually, it was an MBA, I believe.
Yeah, I got an MBA.
Correct?
I grew up in an entrepreneur's household. My dad had car businesses and marketing and different agencies that he ran. And so loved business, but got called into ministry at 16 years old, had an encounter with God and I couldn't shake it. And so went to college and then actually served as a missionary for a couple of years. And then our funding dried up. And when it dried up, my dad said, well, why don't you start a thrift store to fund the missions work you want to do? I said, well, I've never done a thrift store before in my life. And got this lease of this building in Pensacola right next to the mall. I was 20, I think 22. I should have never been able to even sign the lease. But we opened that thrift store and it funded tens of thousands of dollars a month and in our missions projects. It was amazing. And so kind of got me into the business world and got my MBA, and I was serving as a pastor at a church there too in Pensacola for years, and then sold it all and moved to Tampa to start the church. So it's been a crazy journey.
Well, I did not know this until I was prepping for this episode. My brother, I didn't know that you got your doctorate.
I did. I got it during COVID. Well, I worked on it for years and then finished it during COVID. And so I actually interrupt people when they call me Aaron and I say it's Dr. Aaron. No, I don't say that at all. So
how's that work with your wife, Katie?
Yeah. My kids, I got 5 kids. They're all like, Dad, do you work in the hospital now? I'm like, that's not that kind of doctor. Those are real doctors. I'm just kind of the fake one. So,
oh, that's hilarious. But man, I didn't realize that. So we got Dr. Burke in the house, and but you guys have been married now. I don't know. You guys have been married for what, 13 years?
13, just celebrated 13 years. Yep.
Wow. And 5 kids.
We're pros. We feel like we're pros, but we're not,
No, hey, your wife is a jewel. Every time anybody's around Katie, man, she lights up a room and, she's a jewel. And, it's like, what is it Pastor Chris would say? Because we all have, you, me, Pastor Chris, we all have 5 kids.
Oh, yeah.
And we have 5 kids, not because we like kids. We have 5 kids because we like our wife a whole lot. Come on, somebody.
That is absolutely true. Hey, Lee, something crazy about my kids, though. My first one was born in July. 25 months later, my second was born in August. 25 months later, my third was born in September. 25 months later, my fourth was born in October. And 25 months, almost to the day, my fifth was born in November. Your boy is a planner. I know what I'm doing.
Hey, you have dialed it in. You've not only dialed in multi-site and planting churches, brother, but you are populating the earth in a perfect sequence and rhythm.
Everybody thinks Pastor Chris is the systems guy. I'm the systems guy. I've got this.
You got it. Down. When it comes to population growth, we need to get you to do a lab and just a podcast on that. And oh my gosh, that's awesome. Well, brother, we're just so excited today, to have you. And I want to dive into a few points. And we're going to get to the unfair advantage, 7 keys from the life of Joseph for transforming any obstacle into an opportunity. I just love that. But I want to tap in for a second to leadership, kind of kingdom builders. You guys have a legacy team that you do at Radiant. And tell us a little bit about Radiant Church, some of your church planning journey. You shared a little bit about having to move from Pensacola. You had that season where God really used that thrift store as a mechanism to get some things funded and that entrepreneurial gift inside of you. I think church planters, which, by the way, to all our listeners, because we have pastors and business people on here, is you got to understand, like I've walked in both worlds now of ministry, local church, and business for 35 years. The greatest entrepreneurs I know are church planters. They're going into a city where they probably don't know many people. They don't have any money. They're sitting there with a dream in their heart to impact the world for Jesus and plant a church. They sell everything they have, they liquidate, and they move to a place and they plant a church. I mean, like, who does that? That's the most riskiest thing on the planet. But you guys have done it, and not only done it well, but you're a model for multi-site as well. So can you unpack a little bit about the current state of Radiant? So you planted in Tampa. We
planted in Tampa, didn't know anybody, came in faith. My in-laws lived an hour away, and we crashed at their house for 3 months and I was driving in every day. I mean, that's a tough season. You're risking it all. And if anybody's ever started a business or started a church, you're going all in. And what's really crazy is during the season, I just wasn't stressed. Like, I just knew God gave me a grace for it. When I look back, me and Katie talked about it. We're like, what were we thinking? We had a 6-month-old baby, a little demonic dog that thank God has gone on to. He didn't go on to a better place. I don't know where he's at, but and I'm like, the Lord gave us a grace for it. So we started the church. We were in a rundown dollar theater in a really awesome area of Tampa, but a terrible facility. But it was the only place we could get. So, and I even talk about it in the book. It's like, listen, it's not about what's handed to you. It's how you handle it. So we made the most of that facility, and the church started to grow and people started to get saved, and it was amazing. And we added another service a few months later, and then another service. And then we were simulcasting to different theaters that we were in. And then we took over the lease, and we've had the lease now for, almost 7 years of that plaza. And then we ran out of space. And so, it's scarcity breeds creativity. So we had scarcity. We just thought, all right, let's get a creative way to do it. And so we went multi-site, and we were horrible at it, horrible for a while. But we learned everything that you shouldn't do by experience. And that was a terrible way of doing it, which was, by the way, different than I launched the church. The way I launched the church is I went to ARC and I said, I've never done this before. I don't plan on ever doing it again. Teach me everything I need to know. I don't want to be creative. You tell me what to do. Well, but then we went multi-site. We thought we had it all together, and that was a terrible idea. And it struggled big time. But we learned from our failure. And there's something about the leader that decides, you know what, if I'm going to fall down, I'm going to figure out why I fell, how to do this again so I don't fall. And so a year later, we launched a third campus, and that one thrived. It's still one of our healthiest campuses we've got. And then we've launched one every year since, including in COVID, in the middle of COVID. And so we're now the Lord is really opening massive doors for us with churches that just from all different denomination backgrounds that just could not make it through COVID. They're 10 to 100 people. They've got these incredible properties that are just sitting there. And we are right now about to open our third campus. That's one of those acquisitions of merger, and from a Baptist church in town. So that'll be our 9th campus in the Tampa Bay area. 3 of them were churches that gave us their facilities and merged with us. So the Lord's doing something amazing through that. And so just trying to reach this community for Christ. And there's a lot of people. And so that's kind of our journey.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You said something. I want to back up 1 second. You said something about, what you can learn going through even a failure. And I remember something John Maxwell said that really impressed me, talking about there's a return on failure. Where we look for a return on investment, or even in the kingdom, an eternal return on investment, there can be a return on failure. And the value of failure is learning. And then the value of learning is improvement.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting. The best leaders I know learn from all different types of failure, including what are you learning from the people that walk off your staff? So you think of it as a fail. What I've realized is some of the best improvement I've ever gotten in staff culture is through our exit interviews now. When we think of, man, we blew that really one, good. It didn't work well. We even blew, how it worked. And we just realized that, man, we can learn from every situation, even terrible ones. Yeah. So you just got to lean into figuring out what's the lesson that you need to learn through it.
I've watched you, and you have a unique. How old are you, Aaron?
39.
Okay, 39 years. You have a very unique. You're very intentional. You're very focused, but you have this insatiable appetite to be teachable. And I think what happens is sometimes in the grind, sometimes in the what we're doing, and even more so when we become successful, many times we don't sustain that success because we don't stay teachable. And I've watched you. You're like a sponge. Every environment, I've been with you in different sessions, whether it's a conference or roundtable or whatever, and you're always learning, and you've kept consistent in your teachability. And I think that breeds a really healthy leader. You did a series on your podcast, Made for More, that talked about 6 areas of a healthy leader. Why don't you give us kind of a snapshot, maybe some of the big takeaways because you've modeled this. And let me frame this up. It's one thing to understand and learn something. It's an entirely different thing to live it. So when you've learned it, you have knowledge. When you live it, you have authority.
That is very good. And
in that area,
I realize the best lessons that people are going to learn from you are really not taught, they're caught. Yeah, they're watching what you're doing. And we teach what we know, but we reproduce who we really are. So I went through a season in 2022 where I decided I'm going to stop focusing on so much growth, and I'm going to start focusing on health. And I gave a word to our church. I said, this is our year of health. We're going to focus on being the healthiest staff, the healthiest parents, the healthiest pastor, the healthiest whatever. And I did a whole series on health. I did everything on health. Rolled it out in my podcast on the healthy leader. And what's interestingly is we went through the entire year in 2022 and didn't grow at all for a year as we're focusing on health. And I was like questioning about the Lord going, what's the problem? Like, what's the issue? Then we get to 2023 and we saw the most exponential growth we've ever seen before. And I realized if you get it healthy, God will grow it. And so it was a bizarre, the doors that the Lord opened, but it's weeds that grow overnight. It's oak trees are going to take some decades.
Come on. Now you preaching. Come on.
Yeah. So I realize if I work on the internal things that nobody sees, God will bless me with the external things that everybody wants.
That's so good.
And we've got it opposite too many times. We're focused on what everybody wants and the external stuff. So I talked about being healthy. And I broke it down in multiple different categories, but I mean, as leaders, are we physically healthy? Like, are we taking care of the body that God's given us? Are we drinking our water and, getting our steps in, getting our exercise in? I talked about, are we mentally healthy? Are we challenging our minds and growing? The teachability component of that. And for me, I always want to get in rooms. I want to get in rooms like people like you and people like John Maxwell and Chris Hodges. And I'm going to be in a room in a week or two with Craig Groeschel. And I'm just going to sit there. I'm just going to take lots of notes. Believe me, I was in a meeting with you. It was so funny. There's 20 or 30 pastors in this room, and they they turned to me and they go, Aaron, what's your advice on, and they were talking about multi-site or something. And I said, I ain't opening my mouth. Who do y'all think? I know who's in this room. I'm not speaking right now because I know I'm here to learn. And there's got to keep that tenacious desire to say, I'm here to grow. As soon as we think we make it, we decline. So we just got to keep growing. And so I talked about the mentally healthy leader and obviously the emotionally healthy leader. I mean, and a leader's ability to have EQ. Like I can walk into a room and I'm not awkward. Everybody does something weird. They just don't know what the weird thing is they're doing.
Whoa. Repeat that. That is so good. I never heard that said, but you are so true. Repeat that again.
Yeah. Everybody's doing something weird. Like there's something awkward about you, but you don't know what's awkward about you. And if you knew, you could adjust it so that you could have greater influence on people's lives. There's a way you're communicating or the way you come across. So I tell people that one of the greatest things we have is the ability to improve our EQ. You know, Patrick Lencioni talks about it in Ideal Team Player, and he calls it people smarts. You know, like you got to have a people smarts. But the only way to have people smarts is through a feedback culture. So you got to have a culture where someone can tell you that was weird, that was awkward. So we created that culture in our church and our staff. If we're going to get healthy, we need to be able to speak into each other's lives in a healthy, God-honoring, life-giving way. And so it was that process of just going through it. And so people want to check it out. They can check out my podcast, Made for More. I kind of give some foundations and actually give like a whole like evaluation list of how people can make sure you're healthy. And if you get healthy, watch how God will bless whatever you're in.
So good. I remember my first boss years ago that I ever had, and really I had some different job, like little, whether in school, waiting tables or whatever, but my first real job on my own. And this guy, I did not like at all. I mean, he was just, he was capital H heathen. I mean, I didn't like this guy. He was so crude, rude, and he was just hard cutting. But he said one thing, and I got to give him credit for it, that is really brilliant. And he said this, and it ties to what you just unpacked. He says, when you're green, you're growing. When you're ripe, you're dead.
Whoa, that's very
When
good.
you're green, you're growing. So he says, stay green. Don't become an expert in sales. Stay green. Keep learning. Because sometimes when we get to these levels of where we have success or things are working, we get complacent. We lose that edge. We lose a little bit of that sharpness. And I never forget that. So when you're green, you're growing. When you're ripe, you're dead. So let's stay green.
And I can tell the success of at least a church planner within the first few minutes I spend with him or her, simply based on the fact of, are they teachable and asking the right questions?
Yeah.
When they come in, they go, let me tell you what I'm going to do. Let me tell you how great this thing's going to be. Let me tell you how amazing it is. When they don't have a notebook open, ready to write down some stuff, I realize, they're walking in thinking they know what they're about to do. It ain't going to work out nice. You've got to stay teachable.
Yeah, so true. When I remember one time I was, we were training some pastors and how to communicate with business people. And I never forget this, like, I'm going to do a kingdom builder. I'm going to do a legacy team at my church and get my high capacity business people to get behind the vision and everything else. And I look at this guy and I said, when did you plant that church? About 8 months ago. I said, 8 months? I said, my brother, you have zero equity in relationships. Right. And I said, you have nothing to offer right now. What you need to do, don't worry about having a generosity team. You know what you need to do? You need to have a small group with 4 or 5 businessmen and pour into them and help them become rich where they're poor. Help them become start and ask nothing of them. Just start pouring into them because they have dynamics that they need help in that you can help them with, whether it's family, relationships, their marriage. I mean, stuff that they really, really, really need help with. And so build relationships with them. And you know what's going to happen? When you pour into them, they're going to say, hey, Pastor, man, thank you so much for standing with me over the last few years, pouring into my life, helping me grow. what is it that I can do to help the church? What is it that I can do to be a part of X, Y, and Z? And they're going to want to be a part of it because you've invested and created equity. See, too many of us want to draw down, and we've not draw down on equity that's not there.
Yeah, we're trying to withdraw from a bank account that is at zero.
Yeah.
And I learned that from you. I'm telling you, the fact that I remember going into meetings and I'd text you or call you and I'm going to meet with this guy. Find out what's on his heart. Find out what's the pain point for him. Find out. Don't tell him everything that you've got going on. Talk about his life, what's going on with his children. I remember getting that coaching going, oh my gosh, now it's like, if they bring up the church, great. But I'm here to find out, invest. Because when you want to do that withdrawal and you need to build God's kingdom, you better have something deposited in there. So that was a great lesson I learned from you years ago.
Well, but what excites me is you actually applied it. And
Still trying.
But you and Katie, your wife Katie, y'all actually work super close together. Mm-hmm. And I've been in rooms, been to your church, spoken to your legacy team, and there's different, and you guys are like in lockstep. And for a lot of us, when you're leading together like that, it can be tough. And but you guys have actually done it in a really healthy way. Yeah, well, we've there are ebbs and flows. It's seasons. So we had seasons where our children were really young and really different, and there's never been a pressure on her for that. I love it that my wife hears from the Lord. So I say, okay, what do you feel like the Lord's leading you into? And, it was probably a year or two ago before we ever started a women's ministry in our church, because we just said, we're not going to push it until God tells you. So we do that. But, I think part of it is we just try to continue to have fun together. Like when it stops being fun, then we go, okay, let's change something up. Because this should be the greatest joy. Following the Lord in a God-honoring marriage, no matter what you do, should just bring so much joy out of it. So we've loved it. We're in a great season now. She's serving on our executive team here now, which is a new thing for us. And she's just there just to be a voice into the culture and to the direction of the church. It's a different season. So I would encourage people in this, like, don't put obligations on your spouse on either side. But you know what? When that time comes and they want to be a voice, because I'm telling you, many times the voice of the Holy Spirit sounds just like my wife. Boy,
many times.
Yeah, I agree.
She hears it more than I. When she's talking, I'm like, all right, God's talking through there, through her. So I'm telling you, we have a great marriage. I love it. I'll tell you a cool little principle we started years ago is we call it the 7-7-7 rule. Every 7 days we get a date night. Or it changed many seasons where we had to just do brunch or something together. But every 7 days, every 7 weeks, we try to do just a full day date day, morning till night, hanging out all day. And then every 7 months, we're on some kind of vacation together. So it's at least, once or twice a year, we're getting away, just us. And as a dad with 5 kids, it might be different when they're adults, but when they're kids, it ain't no vacation when the kids are there. So it's a trip. But man, we have vacations with Katie and I. So we practice the 7-7-7 rule. It's really helped our marriage.
Don't miss that, everyone. He's given you a real practical application to live by. And because you're right, going on someplace with the kids, it's a trip. It's expensive, and there's not the same level of relational equity and deposits being made than when you two get away. And Laura and I, we didn't get away. I guess it was our 30th anniversary, and it was the first time in my life that I had taken over 10 days plus off. And we went on a cruise. I'd never done that. And I always worked for 20 years. I worked 80 hours a week, maybe. And I'm not saying to any of the listeners that's the right thing, because my wife had a special grace on her life, but I look back and it's like, whoa, we can get so caught up into just the pull of life, kids, everything, ministry, doing great stuff. But I love the fact of the application. I'm going to share this with Laura. God loves my wife more than me, and he probably loves Katie more than you. And he's constantly telling my wife what things about me, and she tells me. And so, but you're right. I call it the fullness of oneness. When we pray with our spouses, we operate in the fullness of what God's given us in our prayer life. When we pray by ourselves as a married person, we operate in half the power. And just try it. pray with your wife, not just blessing the food, but get together and pray with them. And God does something supernatural, not only in the intimacy of our marriage, but I'm going to tell you what, when you're in agreement, man, God's in the middle of that, and he just blesses it. And so I encourage you to take, that's your assignment, everyone listening, 777. So apply that principle. That's awesome. All right, so now sticking on the sevens, let's move to the 7 keys in your book. I'm so excited about this. It's called The Unfair Advantage. It is giving 7 keys from the life of Joseph, which is very, very personal. If there's any one person in the Bible, it would have to be Joseph first, then it would have to be David that I just get the most inspiration from. And you released your first book. I want you to unpack for us a little bit about your journey in that, and how did you learn to leverage kind of unfair things even in your own walk?
So it was 3 or 4 years ago. I'm praying for a girl on our staff. We're in a season of 21 days of prayer and fasting, praying for her. And as I was praying, I just kept saying the word unfair. It's unfair, the divorce that your parents walked through. It's unfair, the abuse you experienced. It's unfair that you were overlooked. And I kept saying unfair. And then during that time, I felt the Spirit of God speak to me. And it's so clear. And he said, Aaron, it's unfair, but it's for her advantage. And wow. I took out my notepad and I wrote down the unfair advantage. And I realized with life that we have the ability as followers of Christ, that everything that's unfair in our life can be turned around for the good. It can be used for our advantage if we make some crucial decisions along the way. I've seen 2 people walk through the exact same horrific experience. One of them comes out better, closer to their destiny, making an impact. One comes out bitter, offended, distraught. And what was the difference? Crucial decisions made in those unfair seasons. So unfair stuff happens to all of us. The reality is what are we going to do with it? So I looked at the life of Joseph. It's my story. It's all of our stories where we look at it, where God puts a dream in our heart, and he's got a dream for every single person listening to this thing. And he puts a dream in us. But then the reality is the dream gets very difficult, and none of it looks like you thought it would look like. And during that time, I outlined 7 different seasons that we all go through, that we just have to make some crucial decisions. And if you do, you can leverage it for the good that God wants to do in your life.
Man, that's so good. There's power in a dream.
Yes.
But there's a power when it's a God-given dream. But you got to take, what I found is you got to take ownership of that dream, because that's what's going to dictate your actions.
You're right.
Is when you take ownership of it. You can't just sit there and say, oh, well, I'm dreaming about this, or God put this. You have to take action and step out. I think about this. I heard this said recently in a revival night, and it was about on the life of Joseph and dreams. And it was Pastor Jensen Franklin, and he said, we got to stop having funerals for dreams that are not dead.
Come on.
Too many of us we're sitting here mourning over the loss of something that God's saying, that hasn't been lost, that dream's not dead. When you look at the life of Jacob, Joseph's father, when Jacob was told by his brothers that he was dead, and they actually had his coat of many colors, and it had the animal's blood to fake Joseph's death, right? And they gave it to Jacob to say, hey, Joseph is dead, and he was mourning. He ripped his clothes. He was like in massive mourning. Well, watch this. That was false evidence.
Right.
There was no death. Joseph actually was the governor in the second command under Pharaoh of all of Egypt, and really stewarding in the most powerful position in the world. So while Jacob was mourning, Joseph was reigning. And so many times we're sitting there going, we're stuck, and we're sitting there believing this lie of the enemy that the dream is dead. When God's saying, oh, no, I'm not done with that. So we've got to take ownership of that dream. And I love in your book, it's, how do we make sure we're not victims, but that we're actually victorious?
Yeah, I think it started from the very beginning. So the very beginning of his story, 17 years old, he receives a dream from God, and the immediate response from his brothers and even his dad was, That's never going to happen. We're going to make sure that never happens. You've got some pride. They're judging his motives. And the key verse for me that I wrote about in the book was the phrase, and Joseph dreamed again. So despite the discouragement right from the beginning, you're exactly right. Joseph didn't sit there and go, all right, I'm going to give it a funeral, move on. I guess it's never going to happen. He said, despite what everybody else thinks, I'm going to go with what God says. And when you make that conscious decision to go, I'm going to continue to dream with God, even if I haven't seen the results yet, then that can fuel you even through dark seasons, depressing seasons, frustrating seasons you feel forgotten about. And it fueled Joseph for 13 years. At 17 years old, he gets the dream. 2 years later, he's wrongfully accused from Potiphar's wife, then thrown into a prison for almost 10 years. 10 years. What's keeping him going? He keeps dreaming with God. I know that God's got something for my life. So as long as you're still breathing, there's still got something God wants to do through your life. But the path is going to be painful at times. And that's what I talk about in the book, that the pain always has a purpose. And it's going to take longer than you want it to happen. I love things. I mean, Lee, we're get it done people. We like things done like yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
But nothing great with God happens immediate other than our salvation. Everything else in life is going to take a long time, longer than you want, but it'll be better than you can imagine.
That's so good. Greater the dream, the greater the threat to darkness. Greater the dream, the greater time it takes to fulfill it. And, when we were talking before we got on the episode, in that same story, the cupbearer was in prison for a couple days, but he was only to hold Pharaoh's cup. Joseph had to experience 13 years of pain, heartache, but God used it all to prepare him to fulfill the dream. But he was to hold the nation. So I always ask people, it's like, do you want to hold a cup? So they're sitting there complaining about their circumstance of why they're going through all this crazy stuff. God is, keep your heart soft. Keep your heart towards the Lord. Don't allow offense to come in. Don't allow any bitterness to come in. Stay clean. Be Teflon. If someone throws something at you, just let it just kind of just fly off, right? And don't take the bait of offense. And because that really will abort whatever God's trying to do. But the dream will come in God's time if you're faithful.
That is so crucial. And I just want to hit on it just one more time because we see the story of Joseph is incredibly detailed in the scriptures. I mean, you got from chapter 37 through chapter 50 of Genesis, all about this one guy. And yet it never mentions one time where he's complaining or bitter or offended with his brothers, even to the point where he could have taken them out and killed them. Like at the end, they're like, we don't even want to get in front of our brother. He's probably still got a grudge against us. And he's like, who do you think I am? I'm not going to take this on. Like I released that a long time ago. And your ability to thrive in the purposes of God is directly connected with how quickly can you get over what man's done to you. Oh, man. And Jesus displayed this, by the way, because Jesus decided to forgive the people who crucified him, not after he got off the cross. I always think that's crazy because we think if I was Jesus, I'd wait till I resurrected from the grave. I'd look at all those people and go, hey, all of y'all, I forgive you. It's all good. It was all for a greater purpose. Jesus forgave them while they were still torturing him. Wow. So our ability to walk in forgiveness produces so much of what God wants to do in our life. And let me just say one last thing about the prison. I thought this was one of the craziest revelations that I got from my study of this guy's life. And I never heard it taught about. For 10 years, he's in prison. And I started thinking, God, why so long? Like, that's a long time. Yeah. And then, Lee, I started researching the prison systems of Egypt. Prison was not a thing 4,000 years ago. Like, that's not a normal thing. If you did something wrong, they would just kill you. Like, that's what normally you do. But Egypt was so advanced in what they did, and their prison systems were their education system. So if you went to prison, you were deeply educated because they believed so much in retraining and reprogramming their prisoners to be good citizens. Then I thought, look at the providence of God. Wow. He brings a guy from Canaan, which is hundreds of miles away, Where would Joseph have learned the language? Where would he have learned the customs? Where would he have learned how to lead an Egyptian world? He learned it in the dark prison system that God put him in. And so nobody likes prison times in our life. Nobody likes the behind the scenes developmental times, but God always uses it to teach us something great. You just got to embrace it. And I thought that was so interesting that Joseph graduated out of the prison system with a doctorate in Egyptian life. No wonder he was able to now rule and reign the way God wanted him to be, but he wasn't ready 10 years before.
That is so good. You took that, brother, to a whole nother level. And so I'm sitting here in bachelor degree level. You just took us to the doctorate level there. That was amazing. I've never, ever heard that about their prisons and how they were investing in really trying to rehabilitate prisoners to be valuable in life and so forth. That is awesome. Well, brother, I tell you what, this has been this has probably been my most favorite podcast I think I've ever done. No, I'm telling you, man, you have helped us. You've helped me. And so I'm just really grateful for you. But I've got one last question before we close. And I always ask every guest on the podcast that, and it's a personal question, but it really, I think, is one of the most powerful questions that we need to know the answer at some point in our life. And that is, what does Aaron Burke want his legacy to be?
I want a couple things. One, I want my kids to say that my dad was the real deal and that he loved Jesus and he loved the church and he genuinely loved us. Because I really think so much of legacy is that those who are the closest to us are also those who are most impressed with us. Yeah. Because that's good legacy. I don't really care what people on social media think. I don't care if people show up to my funeral. I want my kids to follow the Lord because they watched my life. That's what I want my legacy to be.
So good. Well, brother, you are the real deal, and I'm grateful for you and Katie and your beautiful family. But what an incredible conversation. Just want to thank you for the wisdom, really, and the revelation that you've really imparted to us. And so you can check out, and I just highly, highly recommend, go to Amazon or actually Aaron Burke. .com, Aaron Burke, AARONBURKE.com, and you can get all things Aaron. If you wanted, I highly recommend if to even bringing him into your church as well. But I would get, for all of your leaders in your church, I would make the investment to get the unfair advantage, and I think it will be a blessing to you. So as always, we're just so honored that you would join us. If you want to follow us on any of the socials, it's kingdombuilders.us. And don't forget, join us next time. And remember, your legacy starts today.
To learn more, follow us on social media at kingdombuilders.us. And join us next time for Legacy Starts Today with Lee Domingue.